Okay, how do we do a better job? We're not going to get through all of this, but I said this part yesterday. Is up to half of the addicts I deal with have been hurt or turned off by churches and Christians. And so one of the things I ask clients at times is this: if you were really struggling, would you go to a church for help or encouragement? I can say honestly, not one person has said they'd go to church. That's the last person they go. And that is a sad commentary on us. So I want you to know up front this: I am not here with some bone to pick with the church. When I married Kim, she had that false loyalty. And I started pointing out things in her family to her that weren't healthy. And she'd get all mad. And she had never looked at her family honestly to see what was healthy and not, because you just never did that. But what I have to do as a pastor and a leader is I got to look honestly at the family that I'm trying to bring people into. And I have to call them on their stuff, because it's doing a ton of damage. And so it might sound like I got kind of a negative bone to pick. It's not that. I love the church and I want it healthy. But in many places, sadly, it is sicker than addicts. One way that I talk about with addicts is this: sadly, many churches have become dysfunctional families, and they don't see it. And so the people that come in looking for love and healthy just get rewounded by the church. And so all I'm going to do now is simply give you kind of my observations, stuff that I'm working on, stuff that I think we need to rethink. And so that's my motive behind all of this. But healing, let me talk about this first. Healing from complex trauma. What does it take? Education, we talked about, therapy, support system, and then you have to start building relationships that have intimacy. So those four things, and then you have to learn to manage triggers when you get triggered. So we talked about them, and that was my motivation in starting React, was to provide all 5 of those on a daily basis to people so that they could heal. Many people, so every treatment center does number 1, they give you education. And so what happened is most clients will come into a program, they learn, and they think they've got it. And they go back out into the world and they get triggered. Now they have no place to go. And they don't know how to apply the tools in that moment. And so just education, though it's very important, and it's a lot of what I do, isn't enough, is my point. You have to provide the other pieces. A lot of clients just want education because they think if I just learn enough, I can fix it on my own. And it doesn't work. I have dealt with clients that could teach classes better than I can because they got so much information, they just never put it in practice. And so you have to go more than that. Okay, all my concerns are on the church. Here's the 4 kind of categories that I would put them under. A distorted view of God, number 1. Number 2, a distorted view of what the Christian life looks like. Let me put it this way. When the Bible teaches about what does it mean to be a Christian, it talks about justification, sanctification, and glorification, right? So the 3 parts of our salvation is what it is. So justification is that moment in time where I'm forgiven from my sins, I'm made a child of God, and that's a one-time event. And then my past is forgiven and dealt with. Now I move into sanctification, and that's the slow process of growth and transformation. Okay? And then glorification is the day I go to heaven and I'm transformed and never sin again. Churches do good on justification and glorification. We suck when it comes to teaching sanctification. And much of what I do, if you want to think of it in a biblical perspective, is I just teach sanctification. What does it mean to change and grow? What does that look like? So Paul does this. He says, I work with 100% of my energy and I trust God for 100%. We don't go 100% God and 100% me. That doesn't make sense. We think if it's 100% God, then I do 0. If it's 100% me, then God does nothing. And so guess what addicts love? They love magic pills. So they get attracted to Christianity because they say, come in and God will change you. And to them, 100% God, 0% me. That's distorted. So we can't understand 100% God and 100% me, but that's what the Bible teaches. So I give my 100% effort, but I'm trusting God 100% to somehow provide. And so we have to teach it that way. And then it's just a very messy process and a very slow process. And we don't like messy and we don't like slow. And then the third one, as I just mentioned, churches have become dysfunctional. And we'll talk about that. And the fourth one, when you work today with addicts, you're working with a cross-cultural experience. So if a person wants to be a missionary to China or to a tribe in South America in the Amazon forest, they go for cross-cultural training. Because if you don't go understanding how the people think and what their values are, you can go in there with all your Western ideas and destroy it. And so what? Sadly, Christianity in the West has become its own subculture. But it's become out of touch with people outside of that culture. And so we want to bring people into our culture without understanding their culture. And there's a growing gap. And so if we're going to effectively reach out to people in a very different culture, even though they're in the same town and the same neighborhood, we need to understand their culture. You know, one of the sad parts of a dysfunctional family, dad wants the kids to understand what he wants, but he never takes time to understand what the kids are. He never sees the world through their eyes. He never understands and takes time to understand their pain and stress. He just wants them to get him. And the churches can be guilty of the very same thing. So we'll jump around very quickly here. I talked about the dysfunctional family stuff yesterday. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, except to just add this. You can get the Bible and twist it to support dysfunctionality. If you just twist it enough, or if you just look hard enough, you can find a verse you can twist in order to support dysfunction. So I'll give you an example. Ephesians 5 says, wives, submit to your husbands. Amen. And so what does that support? An abusive man. He says, the Bible says you're supposed to do whatever I tell you to. I got a Bible verse to prove it. But here's what I love about the Bible. Did you notice the next verse that follows that? Husbands, love your wives. So whenever there's a relationship in the Bible, and there's a difference between the people or parent-child, God gives two commands side by side. He never just gives one command for one of the people. So he doesn't say, wives, submit to your husbands, and stop there. He says, no, there's two people in this. I need to give a second command to the husbands. And what does he say? Husbands, submit to your wives. Basically what he says. So marriage is a relationship of mutual submission by mutual love. Then he goes on, or in the next chapter he says, children, obey your parents. What does every complex dad love? That verse. Children, you're supposed to obey me. Do you want to know what he says this next verse? Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger. Don't create complex trauma. And so God always puts them, because we kind of pick one and forget the other because it suits us. And God says, I'm not going to let you do that. You've got to look at both and bring them into balance. Otherwise, you'll end up with distortions. So if you grew up in church like I did, I've been going to church since I was in my mother's womb, 5 times a week, most of my upbringing. I could tell you every verse that's been used to support sick stuff. Because the Bible, if you twist it enough, you can make that happen. And so the danger is, it's not just that you twisted the Bible. It's now you say, I got God on my side. And God is a club now, so that's spiritual abuse. And the damage that does is even greater than the twisting of the verse. Because now you say, God's on my team. And he supports what I'm doing. Okay, enough on that. Well, so the other thing that happens with that, so when you say, wives, submit to your husband, and you camp there, you're not just overlooking this next verse, you have to overlook much of the Bible. So the Bible always gives a complete picture, but you got to look at all of the Bible, not just one little verse. And so why did God take Eve out of Adam's rib? I can't prove this, but I think if he took it out of his head, it would be that women are over men. If he took it out of his toes, it would be men are over women. He took it out of a rib because we're equal. We're side by side. And then you go through the Bible, and it says God created man in his image, but the word for man is humans. We're both created in God's image. We're both equal, and then God never supports abuse or selfishness, so don't use a verse to try to support it. So you got to look at the bigger picture. And so all of that, complex trauma, families live with double standards. So it goes like this. Dad says, I can be angry, but nobody else can. Mom says, I can be sad, but nobody else can. So there's always 2 standards or 3 standards. And it's very easy to do that. And as churches, we got to watch out we don't fall into that. And the other thing then that happens when you have an abusive authority is if something's wrong, it's your fault. They will twist every conflict to make it your fault, not their fault. They'll never own their own stuff. And so humility becomes a good thing, important thing. What happens in a lot of churches is this. You say to people, you're depressed, you just need to pray more and have faith. They come back a month later, they're still depressed. What do we say? You must be doing something wrong. We turn it back on them. We don't say maybe our theology's wrong and look at ourselves. We turn it back on them. That is dysfunction. Okay. Next thing, and this, some of you are going to get a little bit uncomfortable with this, but growing up in church, what I realized over time was we have hundreds of unspoken rules. We don't even know, like we couldn't even verbalize them unless somebody did something wrong. So I asked a guy once, I said, what would you do if a guy came in here with a baseball cap on? I say you have to get rid of it. Why? Well, that's wrong. This is God's place of worship. Could you show me a verse in the Bible that says that? But what I found was there's this huge emotional response to what he thought was proper. So let me take that a little bit further. Definition of legalism goes like this. So let's say that you were raised in the hippie generation, okay? And so part of the hippie generation was long hair and all of that stuff. And then you become a Christian and you say, for me, long hair was a rebellious act. It was a defiant act. So I'm going to cut my hair short as my own way of saying, God, I never want to rebel again. Okay? That's beautiful. That's perfect. Where legalism comes in is the person that comes in next Sunday with long hair. And you go to them and say, you need to cut your hair. That's legalism. So what I have developed as what I think my relationship with God needs and what it looks like in externals, I now impose on others. So we just had a situation. So React, we use a church. They give it to us free of charge. And so we tell people this is your home. Treat it like you're at home. So there's a couch. And one day, one of the clients had a really tough morning with a lot of painful stuff. And at lunchtime, they flaked out on the couch. The church secretary came in, flipped out. You can't sleep on a couch in church. And I just was livid. Because that's legalism. Now I'm going to push your buttons a little bit here, okay? Tattoos. Clients always ask me, what do you think about tattoos? I say, I got no problem with tattoos. Oh, good. I go, but wait, I'm not done. I want to know why you want a tattoo. It's your motive that I care about. It's not whether or not you end up with a tattoo. There's no verse in the Bible that says you can not have a tattoo. Well, there is one. But it's in the context that people got a certain tattoo as part of a religion that involved child sacrifice. So God said, don't be identifying with that religion, so don't get those tattoos. But Christians get all bent out of shape when guys walk in with piercings everywhere and tattoo sleeves, and they go, oh, that's terrible. And I go, that's beautiful. That's not the issue, what the body looks out on the outside. It's the heart attitude. We got to get past that. Next one, swearing. Do you realize there's no verse in the Bible that says I can't use the F word? And believe it or not, just so you know, I'm a pastor. I use the F word all the time when I teach. And you know, clients come to me and go, we're so thankful we find a Christian that swears good. But here's what I want you to get. Some of you are going to get upset with me. There's nothing, if you go to any addict and you say, when you use the F word, are you doing it in a crass, mean way? No, it's just the best adjective I could find. And so it's just a word to them. I always laugh growing up, because I wasn't even allowed to say darn or bloody or any of those words. That was swearing. And here I listen to Christians say, you can't say the F word, and then they say, that friggin' thing. And I go, what's the difference? You just used an F version that you now say is right. So every addict that's grown up in that, they have very colorful language. If you don't just accept that, but get all bent out of shape and say, you got to stop talking like that, you're going to do damage. When I worked at a treatment center, they had a rule that you could swear, but when you're sharing painful stuff, if you swear, that's fine because you're talking from a deep, dark place. But you can't swear any other time. And I always laugh because when one of the counselors would get mad, they'd be F-bomb this, F-bomb that. And I go, okay, you're not living by your own rules now. It's all right for you to use the F-bomb when you're upset, but you're not going to allow us. So that's just the language thing. That is a very sensitive thing. But if we want to reach that culture, that is not a bad thing in that culture. If you talk to any addict, they'll say this. I know there are times when I use the F-bomb when I'm trying to hurt somebody. I can make that distinction. But most of the time I use the F-bomb, it's just another innocent word. So we can't moralize that for them. Okay, next one.
About that, though.
Yep.
In just going from observation.
Your kids are taking notes on this.
How do you observe change as people heal?
Okay, very good.
Because I have.
And this will go in different directions. Some find that if they start swearing more when they get angry, that they're heading in a dark direction. They're heading towards a relapse. So their language sometimes is an indicator of how well they're doing emotionally. But others, they will swear for the rest of their life. It's not a moral thing with them. For others, there's a moral element. And so it can look differently in different ways. I'll tell you this story, because to me it's a beautiful one. It's actually on one of the talks on the internet. But Jason, who was the guy that got me to start Finding Freedom and really became our first surrogate child. And I said he was with Hell's Angels. He was a muscular enforcer, bodybuilder, all of that. Every second word was the F word. That's the way he talked. And I just never made a deal out of it, loved him, listened to him, etc. He came to my office one day and he snuck in, he says, can you please tell me how to have a relationship with God? So I explained to him why Jesus had to die. And I said, picture yourself as being the judge of Winnipeg and you have a daughter. Because he had a daughter. And I said, let's say she goes out and murders somebody. And now she comes and stands trial before you. Your justice says she has to be punished, but your love says you want to forgive her. But you can't just sweep it under the carpet. It's because your justice and forgiveness are in contradiction. So what could you do to solve that dilemma? You could step up as the judge and say, you're guilty, I condemn you to life in prison. Then you take your robe off and come down and say, I will take your place. There you satisfied your justice and you satisfied your love.
How is that just? How is that satisfied?
The penalty is still being paid.
See, that makes that part of the phone.
Okay, that's all right. We can come back to that. But what he then did is he started crying. And he said, holy fuck. Holy fuck. Nobody's ever loved me like that. He was worshiping with the F word. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. But so that, again, to him, that was a word he just used to add to. Yeah, so.
What I've experienced in churches, and I am from that generation, Fletcher, and I was raised in a Christian family, and I was raised. And there were very good Christians in my family, and they were all sort of dysfunctional. And for Celtic, so everything was stayed down. It's all a secret. You can't tell anyone else. You didn't know where to go to get help if you were depressed, because you were told you were a bad person. Make a long story short, what I have found, and I think it was 10 years ago, and I went and came to that book. What I found is the expectation is she's been saved, a month's gone by, oh good, the Holy Spirit should be gone by now. Well, I gave my heart to Jesus when I was 4. It didn't change when I was here 20 years ago. It hasn't changed now, and I still swear. This does not mean that I don't have hope.
Exactly.
You know, and I'm so tired of having a standard of behavior. Oh, he's dressing better now. Oh, she's nicer to
Right.
her children.
Yeah.
It's not up to us to judge any of that stuff
Right.
at all.
So definition of
What
legal.
we're doing then is we're looking for how can we prove to ourselves that we did a good thing.
Right.
Oh, she stopped swearing, so I
Right.
did.
Yeah.
We're all good. If she stopped swearing, we're good.
But I think as people learn to love one another, they accommodate, they point to whatsoever things are good and pure.
Right.
And what I observe with friends of mine is you don't have to tell that impulse comes.
Right. Exactly.
Sit back and wait. They'll be telling you.
Exactly. Exactly. So the definition of legalism is that it defines spirituality by external behaviors. If you go back to the Beatitudes and start with the internal attitudes, then they will take place naturally. But we have to be careful, because some people, for them, it might be okay to go to a horror movie, and another person says, I could never do that. That would, and so there's a gray area in there that we have to have grace in. And that's the part that a lot of us want to try to use the verses, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, and then without really saying it, we're defining what it is, that you have to act this way. And that's the danger. So whatever's pure and whatever's lovely, there's going to be a gray. So I deal with clients all the time, and they ask me, if I'm a godly person, can I masturbate? I go, that's a gray area. The Bible doesn't really talk about it. You have to sort that out with God. I'm not going to tell you a legalistic rule around that, because that would be my own personal opinion, but God doesn't touch on that. And so those become those gray areas that the Bible is silent, and we have to let God's Spirit lead. So the beauty of this for me is this. Jesus said this: John the Baptist never drank and never partied. The Son of Man comes along and he drinks and parties. Both were the most godly men in the world. They lived in two different ways. And so that, to me, is there's gray areas that God can lead one person differently than he could another. And we don't like that because it makes it messy. We want it all neat and tidy.
This word agency came up because I'm saying this because I know all I know I want to make legalism about not being legalistic.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to like work it, and I'm like starting to walk on eggshells, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's what Christ is.
Exactly.
And I want to say it this way, and I'm hanging on when I'm trying to share this, is that I've been getting some feedback, or not like solicited, but just like when I'm washing or I'm walking out there, and people from the church that I've seen for a few months here, that actually getting to know me and things like that. And I've heard people, I use the term tell on themselves about just being curious and being beautiful about, hey, I noticed that I'm doing this and I'm not. I can see them being hard on themselves. And why do I see that? Because I do it too. And so I'm saying this a lot because I love people travel. No one's hard on me.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I think is beautiful about this is that what's happening, I don't die at all. And we don't have to do anything. We get to. And so I'm very proud of this church. I've never been more proud of this church about how this is how we die up. And people have been, you know, I'm not naive. I'm sure not everyone's like, oh, this is awesome. But
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
So anyways, I just want to include myself that, you know what, I don't want to say that I don't judge, or I don't have mental model or emotional past. I do that. But then I'm allowed to go, hey, what's going on? I'm able to take ownership of it. You know what? And one last thing is just like even what went on about the swearing part. Because sometimes I do, I secretly clean up my language when I think I'm doing more recovery and whatnot. But then at times I'll just like, but no different than someone calling me out on the treatments and my humor. I was like, or I'm a bit funny to me. And this pastor guy was like, your humor's no better than punch.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I felt like how, but it's true.
Yep.
And so humor can be a beautiful light thing.
Exactly.
But at times I can act out
Yep.
or that either.
Yep.
And so I don't have it worked out about F-bombs or not. But I too communicate what I'm doing well spiritually. It just kind of takes care of itself.
Yep. Okay, just let me make a comment and then we're going to jump here. What I have said to churches that have wanted to start having addicts come is be prepared to get pushed out of your comfort zone and be prepared to have every little unspoken rule challenged. Because they will talk to each other in the service. They'll get up and walk out and get a coffee. They'll come in with a mini skirt on and all of that kind of stuff. And everybody's, ah! Get used to it. That's their world. That's acceptable in their world. And so if we don't accept that and take them aside and say you shouldn't be dressing like that or whatever, that just sends all the wrong messages. Okay.
Well, I think the part that really bothers me and that I think is so uncool about church is, I think it's about God and everything that people do and say. Like, when somebody makes a comment like, yeah, but we will see them eventually move in that direction, or they will eventually clean up this, whatever. When I hear something like that, I am assuming they are thinking they're representing God.
Yep.
In other words, God is like that. And I know God's not like that because I have my own experience of God. And now when I have my experience of God, compared it with the experience that I hear from coming from others, I think your experience has got to be wrong because my God actually does not care about that. So if your experience is wrong, if you're in the church, then the church got to be wrong.
Right. Well said.
I
And you put into words what I've been trying to communicate. And that's where we can actually, as churches, have blind spots about where we're going wrong and hurting others. And we can doctor it up as being righteous when really it's not.
dialogue, having dialogue, one of the biggest deterrents to dialogue is everybody sitting this way. And one of the biggest problems we have, one of the biggest problems we have in our society is that we're not like Asians. We
Yeah.
don't do that.
Right.
If I had you guys in 30 seconds get up and down without using your hands anywhere, can you do it? Can you keep your back straight and have good posture? No. And if I put everybody in a circle so we can see each other, would you share?
Exactly.
See what I mean?
Yep.
Real dialogue is when we look at each other.
Yeah.
Real dialogue is when this is real. I'm being real.
Yep.
Sitting here like this, I'm not being real, I'm talking.
Right. Yep.
Because I'm just going to past your family.
Let me just add on that. When I first brought Jason to church, he wanted to come to church, I was very curious as to what he was going to be looking for. And so what surprised me, and I want you to hear this, is this. His number one priority, are these people real? Do they just talk from their head? Do they just wear a smile, but it's all fake? Does anybody ever get honest about their pain? Or do they just have you pray for somebody in the hospital in a physical need? Or do they share their own pain? That was his priority. And if they don't feel real, they know they'll never fit in. And so that's where we have to work on our stuff. And we have to be real and growing and honest and humble. That's the only way we can really reach these people. So reaching complex trauma people is not about putting on a program. It's about being real ourselves, being humble. That's what will keep them coming. Okay.
I wanted to share this because I thought this was very powerful. It was an image of a person who was drowning, and this one person goes up and says, reach out, take my hand, and the person couldn't because they were too
Exactly.
let them.
Exactly.
And I think that that's really important to just, to define kind of the difference between, you don't have to do it my way, but what can I do to help you?
Yes.
Right? And then even if you don't know, then you can, say, well, I don't know, but I think Joe Blow knows.
Yeah.
Why don't I give you his number? Right? Because we don't
Exactly.
have all the answers.
Exactly.
And I can't answer, I've been in this program for a long time now, but I still can't answer all the questions. I never will. But I usually know who I can refer that
Yeah.
person to.
Yeah.
Right? And so from a church point of view, like I'm here, I'm not a religious person. I'm what you call a recovering Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And which is a lifetime
Yep.
process. But because I want to be able to help other alcoholics and addicts, I want to be able to speak all kinds of languages. So if somebody comes to me who is in pain because of their situation, I want to be, and they are a person of God, but they've maybe been rejected by their church or whatever. Well, I want to have a bit of an understanding
Exactly.
of where they're coming from.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm here, because I want to learn more about how to speak that person's language.
Exactly.
And so conversely, I think it's important for the church to be able to not have it done their way, but to just be accepting and to understand that this person is reaching out for help, and how can I get them that help?
Yep. Yeah, and that's well said. Thank you. Kind of re-emphasizes what we've been trying to communicate, but it comes from another mouth besides mine, so that's important. But really, I think, I'm hoping you're hearing, is we have so much to offer, but we're our own worst enemies sometimes. We get in the way at times of what God wants to do, but yet we haven't even thought through exactly every aspect of our belief system and our life. So let me say this. When I had my 4 darkest years, I remember days I worked on a horse farm, and I remember days cleaning out stalls, and I'd stop sometimes in the middle of it, and what I realized is I had Jesus from a child, but I had a lot of baggage that went with that, okay? So in my mind, it was the baby and the bathwater. So part of me wanted to throw out the baby and the bathwater, but I said, I can't do that because the baby is precious. How do I figure out what's the baby and what's the bathwater? And what I did is I mucked out stalls day after day, is I rethought and challenged everything I believed. And I threw a whole bunch out. But it forced me to rethink life at a level I never would have thought it through if I hadn't been in so much pain. And that to me is what we have to do if we're ever going to be people that can effectively reach others. We got to challenge every little thing that we hang on to and say, is this really of God, or is this just something that I've spiritualized and tried to make righteous? And that is a very difficult journey, and it's a painful journey at spots, but it's important. And so another way to say it is to be effective in what we're doing and reaching the people that are kind of in the most broken places requires us to do the deepest soul work possible. Because if we're not willing to do it, we'll never be effective. And so that is so important. Okay, I talked about all of that. Boy, we're just flying along here. Sanctification we talked about as well, and the whole child learning to walk, Romans 7, the things I want to do, I don't. What a lot of people don't realize is that Paul wrote that as a mature Christian. And what he is saying is there's still, even though there's the spirit in me, there's still a dark side to me. And so if we ever get beyond believing that we have a dark side, we're in trouble. And so we have a dark side. The whole thing of Christian life is not to feed it, but it's still going to come tempting us. It's still going to come knocking. And so we're no different than an addict. An addict has a dark side, but they also have a good side. And they want good. But the dark side's become so powerful, it's made the good side they just can't follow it. But we also have a dark side. And Paul is humbly saying, I have a dark side as a mature leader of the church. And so we have to be able to say, we have issues, we have problems, and be humble about that, and that we will struggle till the day we die. Nobody ever gets it perfectly. And that gives hope to people. If we just act like we got our act together all the time, eventually they're not going to trust us, because they say, we know you don't have your act together all the time, so you're lying somewhere, and now I don't trust you. And so what I have found is this. I have watched addicts, and you get a new bunch of addicts come in, and they all kind of show off and spar and try to impress each other and intimidate each other, and they share kind of sensational stories about how impressive they are. And you go as a counselor, okay, if we don't get past this, this is going to be a disaster. Then it takes one client to get real. One client to cry and start opening up. And what happens? It changes the whole group. Everybody starts to open up. And they go, oh, I'm not alone. You go through that too. Oh, I'm so glad you do. And they get hope. And it's when we share out of our struggle, not so much out of our victory, but out of our struggle, they get hope. And then when they see victories possible, they get more hope. But they got to be in balance, the struggle and the victory. Okay. We just finished talking about this, improperly defining godliness, a false standard of spirituality. Next thing I want to say about this. I think Christians, we don't realize that we rank sin as being more severe. Okay? So, God doesn't, but we do. And so Jesus in John 8, where they brought this adulterous woman to her, what did he say? He said, whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. What he is saying is, every sin is equal. So if you got no sin, then you can cast a stone. But if you got a sin, but maybe a different kind, you're just as guilty as her. And then James 2 does the exact same thing. So let me give it to you this way. When I was growing up, I remember only 2 kind of church discipline excommunications. Guess what they're about? One guy had an affair, and one guy had premarital sex and got a girl pregnant. So what does the church say? If you sin sexually, oh, that's the bad sin. We're going to kick you out. Meanwhile, everybody went home and overate and gossiped a little bit and was negative and critical about that person over there. They committed just as many sins or more, but they minimized those. And so here's the thing. Everybody coming out of complex trauma, almost everybody, not everybody, everybody comes out of complex trauma has been promiscuous. So I learned that food was kind of my family's chosen way to sin as a little kid, but nobody made a big deal out of it. We celebrated that we could eat so much and that blah, blah, blah. And we kind of made it into a big deal that we were proud of. But really we're stepping outside of God's design, okay? So when I'm struggling, I'm stressed, feeling overwhelmed, guess what I tend to want to do more? Eat. I sin, okay? If I want to use those biblical terms. People coming out of complex trauma, they use sex. So when they're stressed and feeling a bit overwhelmed, they go to sex. Now, who's worse, them or me going to food? We're both stressed and overwhelmed. We're both the same. We're stepping outside of God's design. We both need to come back into that. But what do churches do? We rank sins. And what James is saying is that should never be. Because as soon as you do that, you damage the people that you put the greatest rank to. And so it's important to you to understand that people coming out of complex trauma, they go to things as their go-to when they're stressed that scare you and just fill you with horror. But you go to the different things, but it's just the same idea. And so we have to be able to acknowledge that. Typically, yeah.
And do we do that for self-protective reasons?
Yeah. Yeah.
You say there's no ranking. I think Jesus ranked and very categorically. You mentioned John the Baptist and Jesus both being very holy people, right? Both of them addressed the Pharisees
Exactly.
vipers, hypocrites, whitewashed graves, for one reason, and that's for the hypocrisy. Because for Jesus all sins were forgivable, when he was called by the sons of, by Satan, he casts out Satan.
Yeah.
The unforgivable sin calls him to, that hypocrisy, that was the biggest thing. And typically it was the establishment, it was the religious establishment that was the most, the greatest target to Jesus' verbal abuse.
Exactly.
Because that was the one sin Jesus had a really hard time with, is that there was a self-righteousness and a blindness that kept these guys thinking they're all right.
Yep.
They're better than the sinners. They made that, and that to me is a sin that's
Yes.
because all the other sins, forget it. It's going to be forgiven, and it's almost like childlike, But that sin, that judgment, that self-righteous, and that's what that to me is my own intentions. That's what the Bible is used for, the law.
Right.
The Bible is used to build up the case for hypocrisy.
Right.
But we are all.
Again, well said. I would put it this way. I wouldn't say that Jesus ranks it as worse. He just speaks about it more, because it was the hidden sin that nobody saw that did the most damage, and it was amongst the most spiritual people. And so he just called them on it and basically Jesus swore at them. He called them snakes, hypocrites. He used all kinds of dirty language to try and describe them, because he was passionate about the damage people were doing in the name of God.
But he did that where?
Exactly.
Where?
Exactly. And it was to lead to repentance, not just to beat them down.
And that's because it's about God. It's so important. I want everybody to hear that, because we it's just crazy.
Right. You're saying it very well. I think they're getting the point.
Go back to the last slide. Top line, are you saying homosexuality is a sin?
No. No. So here's where I was going to go, okay? Hang on to it. Hang on to this. Now, this will probably get me in trouble. Here's what I want you to understand. If you carefully read Jesus' ministry and every sermon he preached, you realize he never once talked about abortion, but abortion was all over the place in that culture. He never once talks about homosexuality, and it was rampant in that culture. And I'm not going to get into if it's right or wrong, because to me that's a huge topic that would take me an hour to really cover. But it's to realize why, if Jesus thought these were the baddies, why didn't he even mention them? Why did Jesus focus on self-righteousness? Why did he focus on just stepping outside of God's design? And he didn't pick what we've made into the baddies. And so again, I'm not going to resolve that question today for people, but it's one we really have to honestly look at. Yeah. And 75% addicts smoke, and so you really have to just accept that, and that's all part of that. Okay, we're almost done. So I'll just do this, and then I think we'll call it. But the other danger that I see churches doing is presenting a magical fix. And I've kind of talked about this. And so a lot of it comes out of, you just need to be filled with the Spirit, and then your life will just be okay. That addicts are looking for a magic solution. And so Christians, sometimes I call it the holy hop. You're going along like this and you holy hop and you're up here all of a sudden. And now you don't struggle with anger anymore, and you don't. And we present that if you just have this experience, all of a sudden your problems will melt away and life will be smooth. And they're drawn to that because life for them is a lot of work. And we do false advertising. And what I've come to in my mind, and again, I don't want to say it categorically, but I think Christians often suffer from this inferior complex that we have to lie to sell our product. So I got to oversell it and promise more than it can deliver in order to get people to buy it. Because if I go and say, have a relationship with God and life's going to be really difficult and you're going to have a lot of pain, who's going to want to sign up? So we say, come to God and he'll fix your troubles. Oh, okay, I'll sign up. But that does so much damage, because here's what happens with an addict. They buy into that, they get baptized, they go to church, and then they still got trouble. And life is super hard, because now their family doesn't like them anymore because they're into a new way of living. And then they become disillusioned. And they go, screw it all then. I got lied to, and they walk away from it. And so we have to be honest about what we're offering and not oversell it. One of the things to be I love it when clients have kind of that emotional experience with God, where they meet God and it just overwhelms their senses, and they have a high. And their emotions, they've never felt so good, they've never felt so clean, and so much love in their hearts. Here's the trick. Addicts become addicted to a high. And they will, instead of chasing God, chase the next experience. And they'll keep going from church to church seeking experiences and not chase God. And so we love to have, and God gives experiences. He gives powerful experiences. But we have to be careful how we talk about that, because then for an addict, they easily become addicted to the experience and not to the God behind the experience. And so we can do damage there as well. Yep.
And also wanting validation, so we come in and I want to be known as somebody that helped an addict, so I talk about the person. That's just wanting validation. It's sort of wrong. But these things stay and they become undercover in the church.
Yeah.
And the other thing is all or nothing thinking, like it's a magic fix.
Right.
So they're very
They're subtle.
tied to our level
Yeah,
of healing.
exactly. So good point, because another way to say it is this. What I'm trying to show you is there's healthy experiences, sensational experiences, but they can drift subtly into unhealthy. There's healthy sharing, but it can drift into gossip. So we have to work to find the authentic, healthy part and be able to help people distinguish between the healthy and the unhealthy. Because what so many people from complex trauma, if they grew up in abuse, the pendulum swings, so they say, never correct your children, let them do whatever they want. That's how you parent. You do the exact opposite. So then they think, well, if my life is full of pain, my life with God is nothing but pleasure. It just swings. So they don't have a sense of what the normal, the healthy is. So if they hear share but don't gossip, they go, that sounds the same. What's the difference between honestly sharing and asking for prayer for a person, or is that gossiping? And they get all panicky and they don't know what to do. So we're trying to help them. And so all of that goes down to, again, it's not what you say, it's your motive behind it. It's the attitude. So it keeps going down to the attitudes. Yes.
Where people can come
Yep.
and share and be curious and ask them for everything themselves if they do have it and ask them. But then to not reputation, not to hold it back, and to go and just share it.
Exactly. very good. Yeah. And we need that because we're wrestling with understanding and defining stuff. So
So is that part of the ingredient that what it's so anybody who wants to do that, to be in touch with them, do you have the time to do that?
No, I've been trying to, not like the manager to say it'll be this time, so I'm looking for some help.
Okay.
When enough to do their time level with public perception.
So maybe the next few months we can do it at the same time. At the same time, short time, so it would be in
yeah, so that's definitely, I think there's enough interest to follow up on that and to see some good stuff continue to happen.
Just wanted to mention something. A lot of retreat center have cultural foundations and others very lateral violence and lateral kindness. I don't know if talk on that. But when you're talking about gossip, that's a good way of
Yes.
finding the gossip part into the discussion with everyone.
Exactly.
That laterally violence and
Yep.
kindness is spreading some of the time, spreading some of the violence. And you see a difference, you can see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of what I do is help people put words to concepts that they kind of have an idea of, but once they just need the words to clarify it. And that's that lateral violence, lateral kindness. It just gives you a kind of a peg to hang your hat on and it makes sense out of it for you. So that's very important in kind of developing a framework of thinking. Good.
to ask you this, ever since yesterday.
Okay.
This may seem like we're going back in time. Well, so, how can we differentiate between the CT person
Yeah.
and a person who has picked up behavior by
Yep.
role model
Yep.
from parents or everybody?
Okay, very good question. So if you look at the 50 characteristics, so complex trauma people will have those as kind of their main ways of coping. But every person, even from a healthy home, will be tempted at times to do those things. So, and they might do them for a bit and then kind of catch themselves. The longer they stay in it, though, the more unhealthy they will become. And so they end up looking like a complex trauma person because of that. So those 50 characteristics aren't just for complex trauma people because everybody faces them at times. When you get to the role model thing, what people is very important for people to realize is this. If you have an unhealthy role model, so they did those 50 things, but they said the right words, they played with you, they provided for you, but they didn't handle stress well, they didn't handle anger well, they weren't a good role model. That role model is complex trauma. It's the most subtle form. Yes. Yeah. So if you take a child, I had the most interesting thing. At my parents' 60th anniversary, they brought a picture that had my grandpa, my dad, my brother, and his son. So 4 generations of Fletchers, and they were all sitting on a couch. Their posture was identical. They all sat slouched. All 4 generations. And they slouched in the exact same manner. Now, I'm pretty sure my dad didn't sit my brother down and say, sit this way on a couch. He just sat that way, and as kids, we picked it up. He was a role model. He didn't have to verbally teach us or anything. So what I say to clients all the time, it's what your parents, their attitudes, not their actions, that you picked up. They might have done lots of nice things, but you picked up their bitter attitude. You picked up their anger. You picked up, and that's the part that shaped you the most. And that, they begin to see that, and they go, yeah, because I became like them in how I handled my anger. I became like them in my bitterness and all of that. So children have this amazing ability to pick up not what you do, but who you are. And that is what shapes them. And if that's not healthy, then they get the complex trauma. But very good question. Okay? Some people are starting to go to sleep, so let's end it there with, again, clients, people in recovery are the world's best at beating themselves up. They need to learn to be gracious to themselves, but part of that is that we are gracious to them. And then they can begin to learn that. So thank you so very much. What I would love is for those of you who really think God is starting to do something as far as setting up a program here, either on the island or in the Nanaimo area, whatever, that you would start talking about that and let me know. I'm going to be sitting down with Brent on Tuesday just to see where he's at as far as, do we pursue doing something more than just this weekend? Is there a need? Is there a place to actually start thinking about putting energy into developing a REACT program for this area of Canada? That's what I'd love to have people talk about. A couple things just so you're aware of what's happening. We were asked a year ago to go into the 5 reserves in northern Alberta and to teach people about complex trauma. We've been asked now to go into the reserves in northern Manitoba and to begin working with Indigenous people coming out of the residential school stuff, because it is such a huge need, and many of the chiefs and elders are saying we cannot fix this on our own. We need somebody to help us figure it out. So that's been a wonderful opportunity that's opening up for us that we're really excited about. But what I have seen in the year and a half we've been doing REACT is, okay, this is working. Whatever God's kind of put me through and all that I have learned, we are watching on a daily basis things happening, and people's lives are changing, and they're not just staying clean and sober, but they're starting to get healthy. And it has been one of the most rewarding things. So part of what I've been doing over the last 10 years is been training people kind of like, not in a formal way, but in an informal way. And so now half the counselors at REACT have been trained by me and just by hanging around and watching me, etc. So we've been building kind of like Jesus with the 12 disciples. And I tell them it's getting close where I'm going to say, okay, go. And I'm going to kick you out and say, go reproduce. So we're in a place where we could move to start a second REACT, but we don't want to do it just without checking it out carefully and without really having full support and people behind it. So that's being totally transparent about where we are at or where I'm at. And so now I really would love if you guys would just say, we need to talk about where we're at and just see if this is what we believe is what we should be putting our energy into and our time and money and making it happen. Thank you very much.